Kia ora, everyone. Our wonderful flatmate is back bringing you sweet, gorgeous music. So thank you. Oh, it has been nudged.
How's that?
Beautiful. Today, we're discussing characterization, the fun bits of debating, the narrative-y bits, one that we all have both positive and negative experiences with. But, as usual, let's have a chat. How are things? Grace, you've got a test coming up? Feeling prepared?
I've got 2 exams. I have over 1,000 flashcards, which I've started to learn in the last hour. Feeling good. Feeling good.
Yeah.
Those statements sound intention, but I swear they're not.
I had a Zoom call with a lecturer today in which I explained that I had not started the 5,000 word essay, that he had been going on and on about starting it very early. And I was like, sorry, I've got 3 other essays to do. And there's a lot of fraud that needs to be investigated.
That's true.
So I think that got me some brownie points. Joe, what's up in your life?
Grace is on a political campaign to get us to consider getting a bunny.
If our landlord is watching, this is entirely hypothetical and
entirely hypothetical. And I think that might meet her maternal needs. So I think the 2 of us, I don't know, I'm very close to considering becoming the father of a little bunny.
Not a child yet, of a rabbit, to be.
Oh, no, we're not.
I had a rabbit as a child, and his name was Hazel. And they make really good pets. Like, they can come in the house, they can play with the other animals. Like, we had a cat, and he used to play with the cat and chase around the house. And
see, this is how Grace does it. She's like, rabbits are great because they play with other animals. Therefore, we have a rabbit, and now we need other animals. And then suddenly we have like 8 pets.
And suddenly I have a menagerie of pets and obligations. But I think a bunny would be kind of fun, and it might be a little bit like...
They're really cute.
Oh, they're good. And also, when Grace needs like post-study, like playtime, here's the bunny.
Joe wants me to leave him alone.
Also exciting news, Xi'an Food Bar is open. So go get some food there.
Oh god, it was so good. We should go again.
Yeah, we should. Tonight I'm getting dinner from Sunnytown because these 2 have decided to eat meat. So as soon as this finishes, they were like 6:30 is when we closed. So I'm going to sprint over the hill, and pick up my Chinese food and have a leisurely walk back.
Can you order in advance?
Yes, I've already pre-ordered.
Just pause. Oh, I was going to say, just order on. It'll order live.
Yeah, I was just like 6:30. I will be there.
Love that.
I can like replay the decision as to what to get. I almost forgot what food I liked from that place, but luckily I recovered. Neat. So I think enough about our invigorating personal lives. Some quick debating news. Obviously, huge debating weekend coming up. We've got Jurassic IV spearheaded by the glorious man on his phone to our left. Anything you want to tell the adoring fans about Jurassic IV?
No, it's going to be fun. Most of the information should be online by now. If you're watching and you plan on attending Jurassic IV, look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Would really appreciate it if you can get onto Discord and get all of the information for the tournament on there, because obviously we're going to be running the debating itself on Zoom. A lot of the information we'll be sending you will be on Discord, and we'll probably communicate with you mostly on that. So please get on there and read all the information we have uploaded already, and that'll mean we'll be able to run things pretty smoothly tomorrow.
And obviously you all haven't seen us since Melbourne Online Open, and we want to say special shout out to friend of the pod, Brindy, for debating with Joe and I. Was an invigorating invigorating experience. Ran incredibly over time, so I think all of us in our respective endeavors this weekend will be.
I enjoyed it though.
Yeah.
I enjoyed speaking with Brindy.
She's
That was
amazing.
fun.
Just so
It was
much fun.
fun
to
and
be
so affable.
Yeah.
So affable compared to us. I don't think either of us are affable.
with. No, we're like the dark side, the neg of debating.
Yeah. In different ways, but no, absolutely lovely to speak. Both enjoyed the tournament. Fucked off. We finished third, but what do you do?
It happens.
So
It meant we could go to bed. I think the final
so
finished
tired.
at like 11:45 New Zealand time, and we would have been very, very sleepy, especially Brindy, who obviously woke up in South Africa at an ungodly hour to start the debating with us, and had a little bit of a nap, but was really just powering through most of those debates.
You would have just had to go to sleep after your speech if you're in the final.
Exactly. And so while I'll be judging the first round on both days of Jurassic IV, I am taking part in the Asia Queer Open this weekend, which will also be lots of fun, I think. And mine is a little less friendly time zone, so I'll be finishing debating around 10 p.m. each night. Probably not good for all of the essays I've been putting off, and probably should have front loaded to my lecture that the real reason I hadn't been doing too much on my essays was debating.
No, never tell the lecturer that. Say you're just finding lockdown really difficult.
Yeah.
Hard to keep.
Yeah, that work-life balance it's really getting to me. It's really debating life balance was getting to me, and there was no work within that debating life.
How are you feeling? Did we go through that?
Yes,
You well?
I'm feeling good. Tara moved out. We didn't break up, but I think she was.
I was
like,
actually going to ask you about that, but I didn't know if you wanted to open up about that on pod. So
I miss
Tara
my
was-
girlfriend.
Tara was living with us all through lockdown.
5
but
weeks.
Went to level 3, so she went back to her family.
Yeah. So
Um,
we'll hopefully see her once I've finished my essays, because though I wouldn't admit it, spending time with her was a significant factor in me not starting a few of those essays.
That's right.
So now I'm just going to blast it for the 2 weeks in level 3 while she's with her family. But these two have been very lovely and supportive, making sure I'm not getting. And Sammy has been lovely and supportive in terms of ensuring I don't sit lonely in my room all days.
Yeah, we tried.
Okay, discussion about characterization. And I want to start off on a fun note. And I want you to tell me some of the greatest stories you've heard told in debating, either from you or that you found just deeply compelling from a characterization world building standpoint that you think helped shift the debate. And if you two want a little bit of time to think, I think I'll actually start off on this question. One that I would point to is the final of Australs between IIUM and the University of Sydney. And this was Perth Australs, I believe, and it was about drag culture. And one of the reasons I think IIUM won, and I think John would disagree with this because he was in the minority of that final panel.
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
Matt Vallett was in the majority and was in fact correct. Was a lot of the clash. A lot of the arguments were built around particular contexts, either a Western context where you have quite progressive context versus certain non-Western contexts where the LGBT movement necessarily adopts different priorities, tries to achieve different things with its activism. And there was just such a cracking line that came out during one of the speeches where, in response to a point that had been made by the Sydney team, the IUM team turned around and said, this is not a debate that takes place exclusively in Sydney gay bars. And in terms of the story that was being told, the world that the debate was happening in, it was just a killer line in terms of shifting a whole bunch of the arguments that at that point had been very marginal quite closely, and moving the judges really towards their vision of what that world was. So effective use of rhetoric, effective identification of where that world building and characterization was quite important. Any thoughts from you two? What stands out to you from your careers?
Characterization was an important part of Joe and Emily's case at an officers final in, I want to say 2018.
Was this the one they lost or won?
The one they won.
Ah, it's 2018. Yeah,
Yes.
that's not there.
The characterization was important there. I have actually a subsequent question to this, unless Joe has an answer he wants to give. He's looking quite peaceful over here in the corner.
I'm just trying to think of stories that work really well. It depends how broad we're going. What do we mean by stories?
Well, I was going to ask, I think it'd be useful for us to be like, what's the parameters of characterization? I think it'd be helpful to talk about what we think that is.
Okay, so parameters and also value, because I think those are quite intertwined. What do we mean by characterization and world building, and why is it useful within debating?
In terms of a broad brush, I want to say without thinking about it, which is a bad strategy before I open my mouth, but never let that stop me. It's just like you're painting the picture. If the judge had to imagine where everything's happening, who it's happening to, how it all works, it's you creating what they're imagining. And maybe you have direct points where you're like, what will this look like? Which is quite a common thing to do in a speech. But it's also about the examples you drop in and the rhetoric you use and maybe what's in your introduction or what examples your team.
It's world building, isn't it? It's world building.
Yeah.
I want to make a. I was talking to some of the young South Island debaters about this last night. We were talking about the value of examples. Was it last night or the night before? I can't remember. We're about the value of examples, but I think it all kind of bleeds in together. So I think world building is important, and that includes examples and includes telling stories and painting pictures, and the deliberate choice of language is helpful because in debating, judges and other teams and whoever will bring their own priors into the debate, in the sense that they will bring their own view about what the world does look like and what it ought to look like based on their own experiences and their personal and professional lives. And it's really essential in debating a lot of time to rebut that. Not specifically, right? You're not like, your view of the world is wrong. Eliminate your priors. Come with me into the land of chocolate. What you're trying to say is, can we just emotionally jettison some of the prior thoughts and experiences you had and come, hold my hand, I'll show you a whole new world.
I can show you the world.
Yeah. And,
why do you have a pet tiger that's kind of fucked up and problematic?
And for me, I think that's a lot about world building. I think particularly in IR cases, I tend to run very neocon IR cases because I think intervention is good. And lots of debaters don't think intervention is good. So it is essential in those circumstances to quite deliberately world build in order to make sure that they can jettison some of those priors. You need to get people to engage with you on your level, not their own level.
I think the framework of it's about assumptions that are made within debating, and assumptions being incredibly important for how they then conclude on those points is quite important. But I also think it just goes a little bit deeper than just displacing the assumptions. It's also about the background to points, and we've talked a lot about like context within debating and why context, just as much as the mechanisms you bring, are the things you need to know about the world in order to make those points.
One of the things I think debaters often don't do enough is they will explain why an actor, an institution, or someone does something, but they don't analyze the motivation for action, i.e., I think about things quite mathematically because I'm a massive nerd. When I'm doing, say, some agent-based modeling for my economics work, what I have to first do is characterize the relevant object in that computer program, and I will code in a whole bunch of parameters and values. And in doing that, I'm able to build up this almost 3D picture about what the stakeholder institution looks like, how it acts when acted upon, and what its motivations are, and that kind of thing. And you can do that quite deliberately in debating, to be like, the incentives of this actor are threefold, or the motivations of this institution are this. But that's actually, well, I think there's a couple of things. One, you can do that, but it's often quite time intensive, whereas emotional characterization can quite deftly and swiftly characterize the motivations and incentives of an actor without having to explicitly do that. But the other thing, of course, is that debaters will often do all of what I'm talking about here, but not be aware that they're doing that. So I just think I want to explain to people one of the reasons, which is what Daniel was just talking about then, why you storytell is in order to provide credible motivations for action on behalf of a stakeholder who you want to act in a particular way. So consider the United States. If we took a very glib view of the United States, you would say, in say a foreign policy sphere, or they have a variety of geopolitical incentives, constraining and holding back China, having influence in the Middle East, retaining the strength of Israel and Saudi Arabia as partners in the Middle East, and all that kind of thing. Now, you could list all of that off, or in a debate about the Pacific, you'd be like, the United States is in a geopolitical war with China that's manifesting economically and increasingly militarily. This debate is about how we respond to that. Now, that's just a yarn, right? That is not the explicit being like, America has a singular foreign policy goal in the Pacific, which is to roll back the influence of China in a variety of Pacific states. Do you see what I mean? It's like I've been able to do that rhetorically without explicitly doing it. So for me, it's like world building is emotional capture, but it's also performing that task of characterizing the motivations and incentives of stakeholders within the debate. Sorry, I went on a bit longer.
Grace, thoughts?
Another one. I think that's all good. I'm really dumb comment to add, which is that sometimes your characterization is stuff that you want the judge to be like, and other times it's actually just stuff you want to infiltrate their subconscious with.
Yeah.
Like the example I want to think about, I think it's a common piece of advice you have to give if you've been edging online schools and schools edging, is teams go for the extreme and they go, their analysis is about a really extreme world and the words they use are really intense. We're going to eliminate this problem as opposed to we can work on mitigating that problem. And it's little things like that, like characterization can infiltrate so much of your speech. It's about the verbs you're using, your volume, your tone, your punctuation. Just really simple things to change the judge's subconscious. And it's not just like who is what, but it's also like what kind of claim are you staking out in the debate. Like you might not want to explicitly be like, maybe you do, but you may not get around to explicitly saying, we're making small changes on the margins, but to a lot of people's, but if your language that characterizes what you're doing in the debate is clear on that, then the judge will get the picture anyway.
I just want to touch on what Grace said. I think she's completely right. One of the things I think you mentioned but almost spent too little time on is tone. Tone is really essential. Tone can convey so much. And I think people should more deliberately think about their tone before their speeches. Unfortunately, and this is true for very good debaters as well, people will just come with the same tone in speech after speech after speech after speech because I've adopted a set of mannerisms which imbue almost any point or any case they make. And I just don't think that's compelling. And people need to deliberately change that up and think about how they're presenting themselves, how they're speaking, and why they're speaking in particular ways.
And that links in a lot to our second episode when we talked about style and the importance of style.
And it all bleeds in. But I think
it's like persona.
When you're building your world, you want to sound credible on that world, and that means that you need to bring a particular tone to that.
So if I could just stop the discussion on that, because I think it links very neatly to, I think, a very probably useful and practical discussion I want to have a bit later about how reasonable your characterization should be versus an approach that's becoming increasingly popular in Australia, to adopt quite an extreme characterization and then just build in lots of even ifs. So I want to have a discussion there about the credibility in characterization. But before I think we jump to that, I just want to tease out two things that I think are important from both the answers that have been given by you two. The first is one of the less romantic points. I think that good characterization, while it definitely helps you go deeper into arguments, can be substituted just by going deeper in it, just doing the analysis. And I think one of the things that is a particular asset to having a very narrative style of speaking or a characterization heavy speaking is just it's incredibly efficient. So it allows you to make quite complex arguments and close off the ends of lots of little arguments in quite like a neat way of doing it, because it's about telling a particular story that then you are able to use as a broadly applicable foundation to lots of other points. And the second thing I tease out is we had a bit of a discussion about the humanness of judges. And we often discuss that on the show about judges are not robots. And to be fair, some speaking styles and some circuits probably incentivize judges to be a little more robotic or a little less robotic. I think New Zealand judges are very non-robotic in that they don't weight nearly as strongly as other circuits responsiveness. That's not nearly as weighted in New Zealand debating, just making sure you have the last word on a lot of particular issues. But we are speaking to people, and not only does tone matter in terms of conveying ideas, people are just incredibly attracted to stories. That's the way they think about things. That's the way they add color and depth to the analytical chains that you're bringing. And so one example that I'll use is actually something that I did at Melbourne Open, and I didn't particularly intend to do it, but we did a debate about Indigenous healthcare being something that is run autonomously by Indigenous communities versus used as part of a central state, and then how activists reform those particular programs. And one of the things that I wanted to do in terms of explaining the impact or the quality of Indigenous services is start with just a single patient and then explain how it affects their care through all of the points that we've brought within the debate. And I think if you're able to track that person and be like, their care is worse at this stage, at this stage, at this stage, at this stage, it makes it way easier for the judge to see the real impact of the points you're bringing and start weighing it within a framework of the debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my introduction, right?
Yeah, as well.
So in the sense that it was like, right, let's start from the top about a single individual and just tell the story of their interaction with the health system.
Speaking of that, do you two have any real practical tips for before we get back into like a more theoretical discussion, or if there are any anonymous questions that we want to respond to?
In prep, being like, what does this look like? Agreeing on some examples in prep. You don't want to have like 2 examples that every speaker just talks about. You ideally want to have a few more, but it does help if you guys have a commonly set of agreed upon.
Yeah.
Like, not just being like, who does this affect, but be like, okay, well, for a young mother, it would look like this. And being able to bring down all speeches. You don't want to get a situation where just one speaker is using examples and the other speakers have radically different examples. Like, it's not like having a team line, but it helps if all of you can draw on a shared consensus of what things are important. You don't want to leave that to like in the debate. I think it's really helpful to be explicit about that.
And you often notice speeches where there's clearly a disjunct, not just in the points that are bringing, but in the way of the different team members of thinking about the world.
Yeah.
Take 30 seconds and just take a breath, remove yourself away from absolutely everything else in the debate, and truly and honestly reflect to yourself, who is this debate about? And why is it about them? Not who you want the debate to be about. You need to be truly honest with yourself, and not like, oh well, we can kind of move it and pivot it in all these different ways. Who is the debate about? And in most cases, that will be accepted by both sides of the house. And why is the debate about them? And that will give you a great degree of mental clarity when thinking about how you value that individual and the experiences that individual have. Would be what I say.
So I'm going to be a little more shallow than Joe's soul searching. One thing that I like to do is have general and specific. So when I'm telling a story, I have in my mind, okay, what is the general point that I want to convey? And then secondly, what do I think are the examples or a specific story that I can tell that exemplifies what I want to get across? And often when you're writing characterization on the fly, it's easy to miss one of those things. Either you give an example that floats there and doesn't get linked into the debate, or you just have generalizations or assertions that it's hard to ground. And I'm actually quite thorough in forcing myself when I say a particular line. The first line is the general point, and how this is shown is through this thing. Or I say, this is a story. Often in introductions, I'll start with the specific. This is a story that you can connect to, and these are the ramifications for the stories for the point that I want to make. So having that balance when you're building a characterization between specific and then that abstracted, more generalized points that you want to bring is a very important balance to start to make.
I have a completely unrelated comment. Which is that like rep bias helps you because judges assume that because you've done well before, you're probably good and they can trust you and your analysis is good. So they fill in gaps for you. They overrate your material. Characterization kind of works the same way. It fills in the gaps in your analysis. It makes you seem more believable, more trustworthy. If it sounds like you know what you're talking about and you give the judge an idea of what we're talking about too, it's a really, like, the reason I make that comment is just for people trying to understand why it matters. It's about, if the judge thinks you're lying, they won't be able to subconsciously believe, and you need to bring their subconscious with you at all times, and that's what characterization is important for, as well as their like overt rationing. What is the word I'm looking for? Rationalizing of how they may work.
Yeah, and that's also potentially something else that changes depending on circuit. I think a lot about trust and credibility, partly because it's been drilled into me by the way New Zealanders debate. And that's a little bit different in other places where it's more about just teasing out every line of argumentation, and bad faith actions in the debate won't harm you because it's just a technique that doesn't work, or it's a tactic that didn't work, and it doesn't harm your overall credibility within the debate. Do we have any questions that we want to have a chat about?
I love questions.
Love questions.
I'd love to have one day.
That and a bunch.
I'm going to ignore a couple of these questions because I think they're just too general. So what do you find the most convincing way to characterize something? So we've kind of already talked about that. But let's take this question from friend of the pod, Rob.
Love Rob.
In a debate that is being very heavily fought over characterization, what advice would you give to third speakers and reply speakers about how to manage their speeches? Should you spend more time winning your characterization and then the impacts in your world, or spending time in the other team's characterization?
So before we answer that links very neatly into something that I wanted to generally discuss, is the approach to characterization speaker by speaker. So let's start at third with Rob's question and answer that. And then I think what would be useful is then applying it to other speakers. Does that change if you're a first speaker, second speaker, or reply speaker?
We've got to get that tricky context of where the debate is disputed around characterization.
Yeah.
So, look, I probably disagree with what Daniel's described as the kind of increasing Australian approach of running an extreme world and then running these kinds of cascading layers of even earth. Because I think there is a certain emotional ploy that gets degraded when you then chip away at that world. I think that debaters sound most convincing when they build a world which appears realistic. That's not to say you should just stand up and be like, well, consider the average person. You should go into excruciating levels of detail about their world, but a world which is very real and relatable. This is where I thought Ben Jackson actually got very close to winning, and I actually think did win the Cinnamon Scroll final, because he re-established a world of political donations and political competition, and one which I thought was far more emblematic of modern Australian politics than anything else that had turned up in the debate so far.
Yeah, you just told very reasonable stories about how individuals engage with things.
Reasonable but detailed.
Yeah. It's that specific. Yeah, general.
So I would say that, look, this is just my view, but I think if you're getting to third, look, it's probably a bit of a, look, in that world, to Rob's question, if I was a third, I'd almost just split my speech in two. Not necessarily 50-50, but I would just go through the rigorous job of proving that we had won in either world, which can be difficult sometimes and won't always be 50-50, but I think is the only complete way to spend that time in a way that you can be most confident you've won the debate. I just think you leave too many boxes unopened if you don't do that job. So
Also stepping into their world.
yes, naturally. And I think that means your speech has to be, you basically have to play a blinder, right? You basically have to get up and just go. And that means, right, here's how we win in our world. A variety of assumptions, a variety of points. And you just systematically go through and you win every single one. And you just have it all down on your paper and just completely move through the entire debate. Is what I would do in the situation that Rob's talked about. I suppose moving back through the debating order, and by the way, to Rob, I think it's basically the same at reply, but that you jettison large portions of the debate, given the time available to you, to then only focus on the most crucial assumptions and mechanisms. Moving back earlier in the debate, I mean, again, and I think it's just as true for BP, But certainly at first, I just try to build very realistic depictions of the world and just try and win in those. Because I just think there's a very real risk that your world just gets dismantled if you build some kind of extreme characterization.
Debate's just less functional. That becomes kind of a coin flip, right?
Can I add though? I'm not saying that you should build a world which is acceptable to the other side of the house that you can agree on. What I'm saying is that your world should be broadly socially acknowledged as the most reasonable view of the world of that context of what we're talking about today. So I'm not saying, Grace, build a world which you think is broadly going to be acceptable to the other side of the house so that you can have a more functional debate. What I'm saying is that for your context and characterization to be most compelling, it should be a hyper-detailed, realistic depiction of life.
And I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that if you build a really extreme world, you're likely to have a non-functional debate as a separate problem.
Yes.
I have thought it's helpful in terms of how you do characterization. You have to know some stuff, but it doesn't have to be very complicated stuff. It helps if you know a little bit about, who's in power in certain countries that come up. But it's also just like kind of knowing a bit more about the world. So most of the people in today don't have children. So every now and then go and read on having to post an article about parenting in modern America so that you have an idea of what other people's lives are, of different things that are being talked about in different kind of spheres of the world.
Can I toss something out there? I actually wouldn't go on Huffington Post. Go on your serious challenge to debaters, because I doubt they do it that much, or they do it as a meme. Don't do it as a meme, do it as something quite serious. Go on your local community Facebook group. Almost every community has one, right? So Dunedin has Dunedin News. There's other groups like that as well. There'll be, and not Vic Deals, by the way, because that's a university student targeted group, even though if it has a variety of other people going on. Go to your local Facebook community group without laughing or taking a joke or laughing at their spelling mistakes. Take a genuine interest in what the average member of society is interested in, what they're talking about in their lives. Maybe it's COVID right now. Go see how the average person who isn't sure whether their local employer is going to survive or not is talking about, see what they're talking about, and take note of how they're talking. Are they angry? If they're angry, why are they angry? Are they sad? If they're sad, why are they sad? What parts of their life are they angry and sad about? That will give you a great insight into people's lives. It won't be well written. It'll often be confusing, but you will quite seriously get a decent grasp of how people are emotionally handling certain parts of their lives.
Explaining people's irrationalities, I think, is an enormously valuable thing.
No. Sorry. I'm going to push back there. This isn't about explaining people's irrationalities. It's not taking this kind of.
But I am the standard bearer of logic.
Yeah.
But also there's a policy. Do you need to go and read news websites so you know what things are happening in different policy areas so you can talk the characterization.
Sorry, one thing I think is quite valuable about this particular tip, and it links back to something Joe says quite a lot. When he sets up debates and he's identified his group that is most important, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of his thinking is about what does that group value? How do I deliver for this group? And if you don't understand what they really care about, if you only adopt a highly paternalistic view, you run a huge risk of being undermined there. And of course, it's not just about like your local community, because I think your local community will still, to some degree, reflect things that you are familiar with. So seeking out thought leaders in different communities and understanding the priorities.
No, don't seek out thought leaders. No, sorry, this is where I actually want to push back.
I disagree.
No. Thought leaders thought leaders are people with graduate degrees who act paternalistically to their own communities, who are drenched in privilege, but think they're not drenched in privilege because of other intersectional factors. Like, I'm just gonna push back here. When you seek out thought leaders, you get one depiction of the world. It's no.
So firstly, I think it's very true that you should use a privileged lens. Look at whether or not these people who purport to speak for particular communities do actually speak to them. What I would say is that even in informal discussions, privilege does manifest itself enormously. Particular viewpoints bubble to the surface, and there's a real danger in assuming that the loudest voices within like your natural engagement with a community will be reflective of that community's actual interests. And then the second thing that I'd say is I'd also be wary of assuming that you are capable of interpreting these communities if you're just exposing them to them. So I definitely think you should engage with the grassroots, but you should also put in the work towards understanding particular guide, well, basically seeking translation or seeking guides to helping understand these communities, because you're not speaking with the same vernacular. It's really easy to misinterpret things when you're not from that particular context. And I think that was the reason why, for me in particular, I seek out thought leaders. And of course, I think thought leaders is potentially the wrong word. It does call to mind communities, people within communities who try and push themselves. But there are eloquent members of communities who are quite down to earth and realistic about those communities, and are able to explain issues facing those communities in a way that just like not everyone will be able to do, or you won't be able to interpret from just engaging with that community.
For example, the Lorax speaks for the trees.
The Lorax does in fact speak for the trees, and we could listen to the trees. We just wouldn't understand.
Can I bound dance off in just a different direction? I think what you two have been talking about, just to glass out the water, is debates which probably centre around mechanisms about how people feel and act, but there's a lot of debates that aren't really that touchy-feely that you also need to characterize for. Like, don't take away from this being like, oh, characterization is about debates where I have to explain how people will react to a thing. You also need to characterize debates about, characterize in debates about tax or like IR or very technical policy stuff. You still need to use the characterization there. So it's like, if you're talking about some educational policy and you're not worried about how people are talking and feeling, characterization can still help build out to the judge how that policy work, what will it look like, is it believable, being able to say like, well, Sweden uses this to great effect, or little ways you can still be dropping in examples, be dropping in a picture of how something works. Don't get caught up in like some debates need characterization, others don't. All debates need characterization.
Yeah, and that's very true from a mechanistic perspective, and I think making sure you include that in your mechanisms is really important. But of course, characterization isn't just useful for mechanisms as well. What we were talking about before, I think, leans a lot into deciding what's important, deciding what communities' priorities are, thinking through why they have those priorities. So I'd caution you at checking characterization at the door once you've completed your context and your mechanisms, because it's also a very useful skill in talking about like impacting, relevance, weighting of points. Those priorities that I think Joe was very right to point out, the step that we often don't take when you've identified your most vulnerable community is asking what that community values and how we best, how we don't simply adopt a paternalistic perspective. We also think about why a community wants those particular things.
I just want to add a wrinkle there, just to say, I would like, when people are characterizing and storytelling, to not tell me what a community wants, but to tell me what a person in that community wants.
Very true.
And don't tell me, well, a person in X community, because now you're just generalizing the community and telling me about the community, but telling me about an individual. Tell me about a specific, maybe you want to talk about benefits policy, talk about a single mother and the way her life interfaces with the WIN system, or whatever. But don't tell me, be like, members of low SES communities have lives which look like this. Tell me about the specific life of a specific person within that community.
So I think we've gotten a little bit away from Rob's original question and crossed it over a lot with our discussion of reasonableness. So I think I'll just like round off those two things. And just I would also note, yesterday I did a development seminar on prioritization, and I actually spent time going through each speaker and talking a lot about how they should be prioritizing particular things in debating, characterization being one of them. So if you want to have like a more in-depth discussion, literally just going first half, first neg, second half, second neg, and how those priorities shift depending on the stuff I'm about to chat about, go through it's in the second half. This is basically the entire second half of the development seminar yesterday. But in terms of Rob's question about a third speaker, and also those broader questions that we're having about what is important, what should debating look like versus how are judges actually going to react if they are if they are adopting a more robotic perspective, or for example, Joe talked a lot about like losing emotional potence. That's very true unless the judges are being very careful and not allowing emotion to affect their decision. So often that can be a little bit of a waste. And what I talked about yesterday in terms of third speakers is that to some degree, characterization is going to be a little bit set by that point. It's really difficult to shift the characterization enormously. So it's about highlighting particular things about that characterization that are effective. And I would go back again to Joe's answer. You need to be thorough. I think a second speaker has way more room to spend time just shaping the debate, putting in lots of substantive world building. But at third, I often advocate an approach that Joe was talking about. Here's how we win in our characterization, but even if we don't win that, closing of every single argument that they're wanting to bring.
Yeah,
yeah, and that is a huge thing that I think just we need to get better at. We need to be way more thorough third speakers in terms of taking up the whole debate, because I think sometimes we just lose because we're not doing that. And then I think the second part, equally, I think reflectively on what we were talking about in terms of first speakers, a lot more characterization work is done at first. It really sets the tone for the debate. It's a really efficient way to use your time, because then your later speakers are able to tease it out in particular important ways when they are doing a lot of that work and being incredibly responsive. And equally, at first AF, characterization is a really important way to preemptively rebut material without saying, I think the opposition is going to run this point, therefore here's how we respond to it. Putting in that time, just building up your world, both adds color, but then can be weaponized by your later speakers in terms of turning it against points that you think are likely to come up from the opposition. Because often there'll be a clash about incentives, and you don't need to spell out for the judge, here's how the opposition is going to think the incentives operate, because obviously they'll do it in a very specific way, and being more specific may actually stop you being as efficient in dealing with all the material, but putting in the time characterizing incentives then helps you adjust to all those points going forward. In terms of the second thing we were chatting about, the reasonableness versus the quite an Australian perspective of being like, give no ground. This is the characterization, this is the truth, and then building in 15 even ifs. To some degree, I think that reflects, like, different speakers should adopt slightly different positions towards that. Like, I think thirds should be quite a little bit more cynical than other speakers. They just need to win the points within the debate, push the characterization they think is best for them, and then go through all of those even ifs. But building your team credibility, your trust, I think very often comes at your first and second speakers, and importantly, comes at your reply speaker. But having that thoroughness within a third speaker, I think is a good position to do, even if it means compromising a little bit on the overall reasonableness, being quite thorough and yeah, distinct in how you deal with the different worlds that the judge could be engaging with.
I've got a completely unrelated comment to make, which is that, like, take like a segment of this conversation that we've had for like, just like take 2 minutes of it. It would have just been like completely back. Can you imagine hearing this at like year 11 or year 12 debating? It would have just blown your little mind. You would have had no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah. And
it's really cool that you come to university and you actually learn so much about debating so quickly, and that we're now in a warning position.
I didn't learn anything at university. I went to the John B. P. Academy of learning how to speak good.
Yeah.
Like, anyway.
But what I'm trying to say is, if you look back, no matter how long or short your uni debating career has been so far, if you look back, you really have inevitably made a huge amount of progress, and that's quite cool to take note of.
Yeah, I was a dum-dum.
We don't spend enough time taking note of how cool it is that we're all still
yeah.
at you, because most people don't go to university debating from high school. How cool it is that so many people are still doing it, and how much you do improve in so little time.
Yeah.
People don't really take stock of just how much better they are than they were the previous
Because
year.
also I think it's a very organic process most of the time.
Yeah, you don't notice
it's for example, the reason why I can talk about the Australs final and how that really like changed the way I think about characterization to a degree is because I was there, and because I could sit down with two judges who are on opposite ends of that finals panel and be like, please tell me, little second year, why you came to your decision, how the stories that they told played into it. And then, of course, it's true that some people, and I'm really sorry, it wouldn't really understand what we're chatting about. So I hope we as a community take a little bit more of a broad perspective in terms of development. And yeah, if you didn't hugely understand the chat that we're having now, go watch some of the development seminars. They're way more basic. They cover just all of the ideas that if you're really quite new to debating or haven't had a huge amount of like formal coaching at schools level, it helps round off those bases. And then come back here and watch it, and I think hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense.
We've got more questions. Just like, this is just me being like, you know, people stand at P1 and they're like, engage! Me asking for questions.
Someone's asked, how do I get better at bullshitting? Here's my, I get to have one hot take a night. I probably already had 3 tonight. You probably can't. Like, you probably can't get better at bullshitting. Like if you don't know anything, we were having a chat about this in one of the debating group chats the other day. But like, if you know enough about a general region, you can probably bullshit about a specific topic. So we had a conversation about Nick and Nathaniel. There's your shout out, by the way, Nathaniel. At Australs last year, having a debate about Qatar or something. They didn't really know much about Qatar, but they knew enough about like the broad politics of religion and politics of conflict in the Middle East. So we're able to bullshit a story about Shia Sunni royal family conflict and politics there. Now, they invented that. That was a fiction. It was a lie. You know, the guy doing the video, I made it up. Anyway, they invented that, but they were only able to sound credible because they actually did know stuff about Middle Eastern geopolitics. So, like, if you want to sound convincing about something, I don't know, read a book. Like,
yes and no. I think there are also some practical tips that just help you get better at convincing a judge. And I think the first thing to note is that, of course, it's a little bit different in different circuits, but think about judges' trust. Think about how you build up your credibility with the judge, and then think about spending that credibility, right? Oftentimes you'll build up a lot of credibility, you'll be really reasonable, and then you won't exploit the fact that you've gained the judge's trust in trying to get them to believe an assertion that's maybe a little bit beyond the pale. And so, yeah, think about building up the credibility of the judge, telling the judge we're taking a reasonable line on X, Y, and Z, and then conflating that with the stuff that you want to bring into debate that's potentially a little bit more of a reach. So figuring out how to use your trust capital there, I think, is useful within debating. And then I think the second thing is I often find bullshitting more effective when you're having fun with it a little bit. I think I personally don't find it super convincing when someone is hyper serious about a point and then like just shouts blatantly untrue thing. What I think is really effective is when a team stands up and it's just like, let's take a step back. Honestly, this is how we see the world. And then even if they push it, they can be like, just think about it. If you present it in that reasonable way, if you present it with a little bit of levity, if you make a joke about the opposition not understanding how real people think or interact, you can be making slightly rogue claims, but the judge will buy into that a little bit more because of the way that you've packaged those ideas. And it's really annoying when teams do this, like as someone speaking against them, because you're just like, they're saying something that is such a lie, and they're making it seem like they're just being reasonable and they're cutting through the like debate speak and the debate logic.
So grumpy.
Yeah, it makes me so grumpy when teams do that. So think about the way you can bring that levity, not over leveraging the points that you're bringing, trying to be the real talk team. And I think those are all skills that set apart effective bullshitters who just like lie about things in a serious ways, and compelling storytellers, not to bring the negative normative judgment on the idea of bullshitting, because I think it is quite key to the very heart of the activity we're doing. There's no way to externally validate. It's all about assertions. Everything's flying around. And so you want to tell a story that can be trusted, that seems real, that seems reasonable. So lean into those skills.
Also, this is just really obvious, but just on a tangent of like, if you don't know what you're talking about in debate, and so you are making a bit of stuff up, or even if you're not making a bit of stuff up and you're just trying to be honest, but you're don't know what's going on. Oh my God! Don't come into I'm snoozing. Don't come into the room and make audible comments to the judge that you don't know what's going on.
I hate that
School speakers do it all the time.
It's like a confidence thing, right? But it's actually just the worst.
Yeah, because school speakers have this thing where they like feel like they need to acknowledge to the judge that they're bad. So like for their sense of pride, the judge doesn't think that they think they're good, but they're actually bad. They feel like they need to like be like, if I'm bad, I need to make sure everyone knows that I know. But God, it's so annoying. Don't do it. Don't walk into the room and be like visibly panicky. Try and look calm. Try and look confident. Try and look composed, because those are subconscious things that the judge is noticing. You're like whispering to each other, freaking out. You get visibly nervous when the other team stands up and is like, no stuff about like Kurdistan. Try and keep your shit together, because remember, you're trying to convince the judge's subconscious that you're trustworthy and reliable. So no audible comments. Try not to make comments in your speech where you're like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's happening here.
It's like it's almost always a confidence thing. Like, almost
Yeah.
always say it from speakers with a
Yeah.
confidence issue, but like, it's
Fake it.
bad.
Fake it till they make it, fake the
Yeah,
confidence
I was
till
about
they
to
make it.
say, yeah. I saw a really interesting post on Twitter where there's like, what are the activities where faking it is making it? And I was like, to some degree, debating is, right? And it is one of the injustices of debating that lies go unpunished sometimes. I think there's a very famous example of a joint scroll debate about sanctions on Iran, where it was like one of the high-level debates at Joint Scroll, so obviously a lot of preparation went into it. And a second speaker of a particular team, I won't name names, or which campus in Wellington they're from, decided to say, this was years ago, no shade to my big friends, decided to say, oh no, we can't put effective sanctions on Iran because China is currently building a pipeline to Iran to supplement at their oil. Entirely made up, swung the debate. It is just unjust that happened, but sometimes it happens, and you need to be like a little bit cynical. This is about the reasonable human beings who are judging you,
but also like,
who are convinced by confidence
the
tricks.
NHS also going to get 350 million extra a week when they leave the EU. Whoever asked that question about how do I lie better, I'm looking forward to your career in politics.
No, I think
you have my vote.
I think it's a brilliant question. Because I think it really gets to the heart of what storytelling is. One way of viewing storytelling is just like, how do I replace analysis with shade, like the dark arts? But it's part of debating. It's one of the reasons why we love debating. We aren't like some of us are spending our time writing stuff for academic journals, but that's not what we love to do. We love to
Apparently,
debate.
some friends of the pod have asked whether I can leak some motions for tomorrow. What I'd like to say on that is that if you look closely, all of the information you need is online.
The entire internet.
Look
You will
closely,
find material.
Look closely. The truth will set you free.
He's asking you to hack his bank account.
I'm not. I've already basically had that today when I bought you bagels.
You
We
ransom
had
it.
really good bagels today from Goodness Gracious, which I believe has multiple locations, but we visited the location in Parnell. We had a Kranksky.
It's like a Kransky sausage bagel with
It's really
like
good.
aioli and like tasty cheese and
It's
yeah,
really
it
good.
was a fucking slap. How do we flat white with it as well?
So if we're
And nice
unable,
chocolate.
if we're unable to resolve the whether or not we buy a rabbit discussion, I do not put it past being set as a motion just to help us ideas. You know, it's something that I used to do. Sorry, this is a little bit cheeky, but when I was in charge of like motion setting for like random practice debates or clubs debates that I was judging, I used to set my essay topics and use it as a brainstorm because like teams would be really good. They'd be like, here's 15 arguments and here's 15 arguments, and I'd be like, that does track with what I'm thinking. That doesn't track with what I'm thinking. Oh, that's something neat to think about. So okay, this was slightly like it's a little bit like abuse of power, but
It's very funny.
no, but often I write essays about really topical things that I think deserve to be debated, but also, you know,
It's very funny.
brainstorm with your friends. If you have interesting essay topics, be like, hey friends, what are your thoughts about this? It's not against academic integrity. It's as long as you credit this came to me during a debate instead of this came to me in a dream. Leverage the minds around you.
Oh yeah. I have another random thought, which is when you do debating, doing like class debates becomes so infuriating.
Oh,
Because even if you can like win them because you're a confident speaker, it is so frustrating to see like random structured discussions be labeled debates, and then they have weird rules like there's 4 speakers per team and they each speak 3 minutes. Excruciating. Do you find that?
yeah. Well, no, I used to do Model UN. I think Model UN is a fundamentally different skill to debating, and I think it is still a useful skill. And in fact, I did a lot of Model UN in New Zealand, and then it's a Model UN overseas because I was a massive nerd. And I think it's actually a spectrum, because if you've got debating, which is very structured about the clash of ideas, New Zealand Model UN is very rhetorical. I think that's why New Zealand Model UN people do quite well when they go overseas, because they're quite polished at making speeches. The conferences aren't too large. A lot of it is about speech making. And then when you go overseas, there's like 1,000 people in this auditorium. No one really listens to the speeches. It's all about your lobbying skills. So if there's a continuum there, figuring out how to win debates as a structured activity is quite different to convincing a room of a particular ideas through the shade that you use or the way you're able to frame those discussions. And it's really annoying when someone brings up a dumb point that is compelling. Everyone's like, well, that one point is what wins this for the way we think about this. And then it goes all the way just to the real politic of some of the
Sorry,
the
this
huge
just raised a good point. We need to be
volume
really
stuff.
careful that we're not promoting LARPing And Model UN is laughing.
I like Model UN. It teaches you to think about different things.
Get off this show.
I've never understood.
I was a bit
How
lonely
you
as a
use it.
teenager, and
Mod-
it helped me
Mod-
make a lot of friends.
Well, Model
Yeah,
UN
I'd
is
say
bad, actually.
No,
Uh,
Model UN is good. It teaches you about the inefficiencies of the United Nations. It teaches you a lot about real politics.
Okay, the UN is bad.
Yes,
It's really bad.
that's
UN
what
is
convinces you.
no, UN is literally the worst.
Most
And then we
people
take
do,
kids, and it's like, let's be the UN. It's like the worst parts. It's children tomatoes plus the worst global institution. It's
No,
just
but
terrible.
it's a really good way of forcing people to think about the limitations of global power. And yes, I know people have issues with it, but it really helped convince me of a lot of the points that people want to tell me about the UN. I went into Model UN being super idealistic about international organizations. I left Model UN being like, wow, we actually have to
The
do a
problem
lot
is,
to
like,
make these systems
The
work.
problem is most people who run Model UN are like, it's so good that we can achieve global consensus over the big issues which are targeting mankind. Let's deal with climate change.
Sorry if
today.
people are idealistic and want to conceptualize things. I think people have way too much of it.
I'm idealistic. I hope we can one day abolish the UN.
I'm ready to confess that I did Model UN one time, and I did it with some of my friends from Wellington, where I'm from, and we had the votes to give Jack Bolter, who some of you may know, he was Togo, I think, and we had the votes to give him nuclear weapons. But the facilitator got really worked up. It was like, no, we can't. It was against the rules. We can't give Togo the nuclear weapons, and that was it. I never went back. I should have been allowed to give Jack the nuclear weapons he deserved.
So I met Liam Rawlings through Model UN.
Oh, really?
He was year 11. I think I was year 12, and he represented Vietnam at NZ1. So there's some oversharing about a member of our community. Yeah, like I met so many of my good friends through Model UN. Just a wonderful activity. Lots of volunteers who are really committed to things, and often they go on to do really fun things. So a lot of my friends are like, let's just end the feud. Recognize that debating is like objectively like better activity, but there's a lot of fun to be had in doing LARPing. And also, you should be on my side with the LARPing things. You bring quite a strong LARPing approach to certain debates about global politics as well. It was a very Model UN speech, I must say. I did get strong Model UN vibes from that.
Okay, can I just say, Grace didn't even go on hard against Mum. I did, and then you just decided to kill her on camera. Holy shit!
Brutal. Yeah, trading barbs.
Like, have a go at me, but
Yeah, leave me alone.
No, but actually, one thing I would say about Joe is that I think Joe makes a very compelling point about the difference between break rounds and in rounds, and about using the crowd. And one thing that I would say is that I think those skills are quite honed in a Model UN setting, specifically break round speaking, because it is about convincing large groups of people rather than the quite technical activity of debating. So once again, it's like they expose different things about the tradition of oratory or the tradition of persuasion, which I think is valuable.
don't do MUN, kids.
Do MUN. It's great. It's a lot of fun. You make great friends. You do get hazed by. But interestingly, the reason why I didn't do Model UN a huge amount in university is I got like quite aggressively hazed by older UN youth people for doing debating, because there was a lot of bitterness between the UN youth people and particular members of Auckland debating who have since left Auckland debating and who are remembered not hugely fondly, just being like absolutely awful dicks to them. So I would actually just say we need to be careful about bullying within our communities and be nice to people. It's one of the reasons I left UN Youth, and I think a lot of people have left debating because they feel really shaded by enjoying that activity. So let's keep our discourse to some degree positive.
Vickers, friend of the pod,
Oh, I'm gonna get
has said,
roasted.
the pod has devolved into outing munners, useful investigative work, which is just...
Yeah.
I'm gonna start naming some prominent debaters who did a lot of MUN. Connor Seddon, he and I bonded like heaps when we were younger about UN youth stuff.
Connor is like a grade A Twinkie munner, right?
No, yeah.
He's reformed.
No, I know, but it's the like
He's
it's
reformed.
oh
Do
God.
we have any anonymous questions?
Probably.
I wanted to have a chat about BP, but I think we might just save all our BP debating for if we reignite the podcast going into the BP season.
The British Petroleum episode.
The British Petroleum.
If you didn't know this, British Petroleum is now just called BP. It doesn't stand for British Petroleum anymore.
Yeah, they don't want to be associated with
Oh, and then they had the old Beyond Petroleum thing. It's like, guys, still gotta fill the cars up. I haven't got any other questions, remember.
Nice. I need to go.
5:58. Should make some curry.
Auckland exec is voting me off the pod. because I decided to stand mum.
Yeah, standing man is a war crime.
Daniel has been cancelled, and we will leave you on that note.
We're gonna edit him out. This
He's gonna get the old Stalin photo treatment. For standing man.
Going through all the old episodes and just having like really awkward like jumps in the video where it's like, that's a good play. That's a good point, Grace.
Yeah.
If you've been harmed by mine, let us know.
Yeah.
Comments.
Not true. Let
If
us
you
know.
say one is a po Tiananmen Square and that sort of stuff, the PR team might do us a deal and help getting you out.
No, all of us are way too invested in calling out the vicious authoritarian government of China.
If you have a pet bunny, please let us know how that's gone for you.
Yeah.
Bye.